Welcome to Shas Illuminated. Please enjoy the following shiur.
Tonight's shiur in Siman Kuf Pei Ches, we are up to Sif Zayin. The last word on page 184. The Mechaber says in Sif Zayin, in Ta'ah v'lo hiskir b'shal Rosh Chodesh. If a person made a mistake in benching and he did not mention Yalav for Rosh Chodesh, Bein Bayom, Bein Balayla, whether it is benching the night of Rosh Chodesh or the day of Rosh Chodesh, Omer Baruch Shanasan Rosh Chadoshim La'am Yisrael Zikaron. Again, he puts in the bracha that we've been discussing by Shabbos and Yom Tov, a similar bracha for Rosh Chodesh, Ve'eno Chosein Ba, but he does not end off with the baruch like he did by Shabbos and Yom Tov. For Rosh Chodesh, you will not end off with the baruch. V'hushen niskar kodem shishla tova meitiv, like we discussed in the previous sif. This only is true that you could say this bracha when you remember your mistake before you get to the bracha v'atova meitiv, before you started it. Lo niskar at shishla tova meitiv. But if you do not remember that you forgot Yalav Yavo until you already started the bracha v'atova meitiv, Eino choser, then you will not go back for Yalav Yavo of Rosh Chodesh. Mibnei she'eino chayiv le'echol pas. Because you are not required to eat bread, which would require you to bench on Rosh Chodesh, and therefore, since you're not required to eat bread, and therefore not required to bench, if you don't eat bread, therefore, if you forget Yalav Yavo on Rosh Chodesh, you do not have to go back. The Chol HaMoed dino ki Rosh Chodesh, Chol HaMoed has the same din as Rosh Chodesh. The Ramah then writes, "V'efsher the mikomakom yesh la'omro b'sol shar harachamon." It could be that you could say it later on in benching by the harachamons. Commotion es bar el b'sosim and kuf pei zayin gabe alanisim. Just like we said by alanisim, if you forget alanisim, you could say it later on in one of the harachamons. It's possible that you could say Yalav Yavo for Rosh Chodesh or Chol HaMoed later in the harachamons as well. And then the Ramah says, V'ulai yesh l'chalik. Maybe we can make a chilik between alanisim and Yalav Yavo. Ki b'Yalav Yavo yesh bo askoras shemos. Since in Yalav Yavo we have the Shem Hashem as opposed to alanisim. Ve'ein lo'amr levatala. You shouldn't say Shem Shemayim levatala, and therefore maybe you shouldn't say Yalav Yavo later on in the Rachamons. And Kei nirali. That's how it appears to me. Says the Ramah that you would not say it later. V'chei nohagin, and that is the minhag. Let's stop here for now and go back and see the Mishabura and some Bir Halachas. So the first point we said was, if a person mistakenly forgets to say Yalav Yavo on Rosh Chodesh, whether it is daytime or it is nighttime. So if we look first in the Bir Halacha on page Tzadi Gimel, the last skinny line, he writes, even though when it comes to davening on Rosh Chodesh, Kai Malon, we hold the Ein Malzirin also im Shachach Yalav Yavo Belel Rosh Chodesh. As we know, we hold that since Ein Lakashin is a Chodesh Balayla, if you forget Yalav Yavo and Shmon Esrei Amariv on Rosh Chodesh, you don't go back. But Hani Mili Lahachzir, that's only in terms of not going back. Aval lahosif bracha afilu balayla nami. But when it comes to benching, we're discussing adding an additional bracha in place of Yalav Yavo, that we would do. So we're just pointing out that when the Mechaber says beim bayom beim alayla, the reason for that is because one might think that benching would be different, and you wouldn't say this bracha just like by Shmon Esrei of Mariv. If you get Yalav Yavo, you don't go back because ein mekashin is chodesh balayla. But he says lagabi benching, if you forget Yalav Yavo, you would say this bracha even at night of Rosh Chodesh. Let's pick up with the Mishabura in Sivkaton Chav Hey. So we said that the bracha that you say on Rosh Chodesh, if you forget Yalav Yavo, is Baruch Shenasan Rosh Chadoshim La'amo Yisrael L'Zikaron. So the Mishabura writes in Sivkaton Chav Hey, Omer Baruch Shenasan, I am Bebir Halacha, Shebeirarnu B'Shem Rov HaPoskim Degam Osa Tzarach Lomar B'Shem U'Malchus. We'll see in the Bir Halacha, we'll see it in a moment, that most poskim say that you say this bracha as well as Shem Malchus, even though the Mechaber, when he brings it down by Shabbos and Yom Tov, which we had last night, in Sevav, he mentions the Shem Hashem. Here he just says Baruch Shenasan, but it's Lav Dafka, you actually would say, according to most poskim, the Shem Malchus. Not necessarily the Mechaber, but according to most poskim, I shouldn't say the Mechaber is Lav Dafka, but most poskim argue and say that you would say the Shem Hashem. If you look down in the Bir Halacha, we'll just see one line of the Bir Halacha, but in the second wide line, Omer Baruch Shenasan, he says, I am B'shai Tshuva B'Shem HaBirkei Yosef. And they're the ones, if you look there, that say that you should say it without the Shem Malchus. V'chein mistapek aprim megadam ayin shom. Omnam ledina, however, halacha l'maisa niridi yesh lismoch ahani rabvasa dekosvu behedya da psicha tzarech lios B'Shem Malchus. But it appears to be halacha l'maisa, says the Chavetz Chaim, that one should rely on those poskim that say explicitly that the psicha is with the Shem Malchus, and then he goes on to list a whole bunch of poskim that say that you should say the Shem Malchus, and that's how he points out in the Mishabura that even though the Mechaber doesn't seem to say the Shem Malchus, the Mishabura says that one would say the Shem Malchus on Rosh Chodesh by this extra bracha, just like he does on Shabbos and Yontif. The Mishabura continues in Sivkoton Chavav. Sivkoton Chavav is going out which the Mechaber says that if you don't realize that you forgot Yalav Yavo on Rosh Chodesh until after you started the bracha of Atova Meitiv, you do not go back. Mipnei, the Mechaber said, Mipnei she'eno chayav le'achol pas, kedei she'es chayav levarach birchas hamazon. Since you don't have to eat bread on Rosh Chodesh, which would require a benching, therefore, if you forget Yalav Yavo on Rosh Chodesh, you would not go back once you started the bracha of Atova Meitiv. So the Mishabura tells us in Zevkoton Chavav, the dafka b'Shabbos u'v'yom tov she'mechuyev le'achol dafka pas. Specifically when it comes to Shabbos and Yontif, when you are required to eat specifically bread, the imkein, if so, chiyuv birchas hamazon kavuahu b'yomim ha'ela. So therefore the chiyuv birchas hamazon is set, since there's a chiyuv to eat bread, the chiyuv birchas hamazon is set on these days. Lochein takinu rabbanan li'ikuva, gam kein lahaskir sham me'en ha'ma'ora. Therefore, Chazal is masakin that it's ma'akiv if you don't say Ritzei or Yalav Yavo on these days, since you're absolutely required to eat bread, and Mamela there's an absolute requirement to bench. Ukamo batfila, just like by davening, you have to go back if you forget Yalav Yavo. So too, on Shabbos and Yontif, if you forget Ritzei or Yalav Yavo, you would have to go back because bread is required. Aval b'Rosh Chodesh, but when it comes to Rosh Chodesh, af agav she'aser lehisanos bo. Even though it is true that one is not allowed to fast on Rosh Chodesh, mikom makom eino mechuyev le'achol dafka pas. However, one is not required to eat specifically bread. The imkein ein chiyuv birchas hamazon kavua bo, and therefore the chiyuv of birchas hamazon is not so set on Rosh Chodesh. Ulahachi lo tiknu chachamim askaras bein ha'ma'ora shelo liikuva bebirchas hamazon, and therefore Chazal was not misakin that the me'en ha'ma'ora, the Yalav Yavo on Rosh Chodesh, would be ma'akiv in benching. The alkain, therefore, im shochach ein tzarach lachzor. Therefore, if one forgets Yalav Yavo on Rosh Chodesh and benching, he does not have to go back. The cause of Amagen Avram dehu adin biyom tov yoser misuda achas bayom v'suda achas balayla shemuchuyev lecho. The Magen Avram says what we're saying over here by Rosh Chodesh, the same din would apply by Yontif once you go beyond the two required sudos. Once you go beyond the Suda one at night and one during the day, the same din will apply him. Achal, if you ate another Suda, v'shachach lahaskir me'ein ha'ma'ora bebirchas hamazon, and you forgot to say Yalav Yavo in benching, eino tzarach lachzor k'mo b'Rosh Chodesh, you would not have to go back, just like on Rosh Chodesh. Im lo kishalo achal ha'suda balaylo shemuchuyev lecho bayom shtayim. Unless the case was that you forgot to eat a Suda at night, or for whatever reason, you didn't eat a Suda at night, in which case you're required to eat two Sudas during the day. In that case, the two Sudas in the day are considered required Sudos, and then you'd have to go back for Yalav Yavo by both Sudas during the day on Yontif. Kidlakaman b'simen tov kuf chavtes v'mishabur sivkoton yud gimel. Da'az afilu b'suda shniya chozer. In that case, you would have to go back for the second Suda as well. So the Mishabur is pointing out that the same way on Rosh Chodesh, bread is not required, and therefore you don't have to go back if you forget Yalav Yavo. And as we'll see, the Mechaber told us as well, Cholamoid is the same thing. The Mishabur adds on that Yontif is also the same way. Once you go beyond the required Sudas of one at night and one during the day, or if you didn't eat a Suda at night, you have two required Sudas during the day, so beyond that, where you're not required to eat bread, if you do eat bread and you forget Yalav Yavo, you would not have to go back. Let's pause here and see a few very interesting notes.
He doesn't have to say the bracha either.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that, because by Rosh Chodesh, if you forget it and you're able to say the bracha, you do say the bracha.
Right.
Without a chasima.
Right.
If you go beyond the opportunity to say the bracha, you start at Talametiv, then you won't go back. The same din would apply l'chora when you come to Yantif and Chalamat as well. Let's see note number 19. Note number 19 is going on that which the Mishabura said, that on Shabbos and Yontif, the Chiyuv of Birchas Hamazon is set, and therefore it's ma'akev to say Yalav Yavo, and if you forget it, you have to go back. So says note number 19. He brings it to Akiva Eger. What about when it comes to an Isha? The Isha sheshachach aloma ritzei b'Birchas Hamazon shel Shabbos. We said a man, if he forgets ritzei on Shabbos, he must go back and repeat benching. What about a woman? So Akiva Eger writes, shetzricha lachzor levarach Birchas Hamazon, a woman also on Shabbos would have to go back. Kevon shegam noshim chayovos v'sudos haShabbos. Women are chayav just like men in all mitzvahs of Shabbos, zachav v'shamor, and therefore they're just like men. They would have to go back if they forget to say ritzei. Avol, however, says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, Im shachacha b'yom tov lomar yalav yavo. If a woman forgets to say yalav yavo on Yontif, eino choseres. A woman would not go back for yalav yavo. Kevon shem mitzvahs oneg yom tov hi mitzvahs asay shazman grama. Since the mitzvah of oneg Yontif, of having a suda on Yontif, is a mitzvah asay shazman grama, and therefore women are pater ve'ena isha chayaves ba. Chutz milel rishon de Pesach mishum shehi chayaves ba'achilas matzah. In other words, the first night of Pesach, achilas matzah, even though it's also a mitzvah seishes mangrama, women are chayiv because we went out from chametz to matzah, and so too on Shabbos is also a mitzvah seishes mangrama, but women are chayiv because we went out zachav v'shamur. Therefore, on Shabbos and on the first night of Pesach, when women have a chiyuv, so then they're like men if they forget Yalav Yavo, or it's say on Shabbos, they would have to go back. However, on a regular Yontif, so women are pater from the mitzvah of Oneg Yontif, and therefore, if they forget Yalav Yavo, they would not have to go back and repeat benching. Ubir b'shal shuva she'er Levi, the She'er Levi explains, Sha'af im noshim chayavos b'mitzvah simchas Yom Tov, even if women are chayiv in the mitzvah of simchas Yontif, mikom makom ein hein chayavos le'echol pas mach masneh. Simchas Yontif doesn't require them to eat bread, Sharei gamba chol hamoed yesh mitzvah simcha. Because on chol hamoed there's also a mitzvah simcha. V'afal pikein anu noktim she'ein chiyuv le'echol pas. And we hold that even though on chol hamoed there's a mitzvah simcha, you don't have to eat bread, and therefore, even if you say they have a mitzvah of simcha, it wouldn't require bread, and therefore, he sticks with the Rabbi Akiva Eiger that if women forget to say Yalav Yavo on Yontif, they would not have to go back and repeat benching. Then we said in the Mishnah Berurah that on Rosh Chodesh, even though it's Asur to fast, L'maisa there's no chiyuv to eat bread, and therefore the chiyuv Birchas HaMazon is not so kavua. So if you look at note 20, he points out an interesting question that is asked. V'afal pisha la'achar sha'ochal kvar nischayev b'Birchas HaMazon. But L'maisa, even if it's Rosh Chodesh, and you're not required to eat bread that requires benching, but L'maisa you ate bread. You ate a Suda, and once you eat the Suda, you're now absolutely required, mid'araisa, to bench Birchas HaMazon. So who cares that you weren't required to eat the Suda? You still have a chiyuv Birchas HaMazon. So Shlomo Zalman Auerbach explains, Shekevan shela'achar shebirech yotzei yedei chavaso. Since after you benched, without Yalav Yavo, you already yotzei your chiyuv, sherikvar hodel HaKadosh Baruch Hu al HaMazon, you already thanked Hashem for the food that He gave you. Mishum kach afal pishul hiskar Yalav Yavo eno chayav lachzor v'lehodos. Therefore, even though you forgot to say Yalav Yavo on Rosh Chodesh, you would not have to go back. Masha ein came b'Shabbos v'Yom Tov, which is not so by Shabbos and Yom Tov. Sheyesh b'hem chova lechol. Therewith is a chiyuv to eat bread. Lefikach nechsheves birchas hamazon kemo tefila hamechuyeves. Therefore, benching is viewed like tefillah that's required. Shechayovim lachzor b'larosh. They made the benching on Shabbos and Yom Tov where the bread is required into a tefillah. The same way in tefillah, if you forget Yalav Yavo, you have to go back. So too, specifically on Shabbos and Yom Tov, if you forget Ritzei Yalav Yavo, we view the Suda and the benching like a tefillah you have to go back for. Masha'eken and Rosh Chodesh, they never made the benching to be like a tefillah that you require the Mein HaMeorah. So if you get the Mein HaMeorah, you still were Yotzei already, you're Chiv D'Oraisa benching, you just missed out on the Mein HaMeorah. In that case, the Mein HaMeorah is not viewed as seriously as on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and therefore, it would not require you to go back. Then we said in the Mishnah Berurah at the very end, that on Yom Tov, the first two sudos, one at night and one during the day, are absolutely required, and therefore you would have to go back for Yalav Yavo. Beyond that, it's only optional, you wouldn't have to go back. Add the Mishnah Berurah, and if you didn't have a Suda at night, where you're required to have two Sudas during the day, so those two Sudas you'd have to go back for Yalav Yavo, and beyond that you would not have to go back. So if you look at note 21, you see a very interesting thing. Chara steer in the Mishnah Berurah, Omnam lagabe mishalo ochal suudas lel Shabbos. When it comes to a person on Shabbos, where we know we're supposed to have 3 sudos, a person did not eat a suda on Friday night. So kosav l'kamon b'shem ha'shari tshuva, the Mishnah Berurah brings in Hilchos Shabbos b'shem ha'shari tshuva, she'af al pi she'tzorech lechol shalosh suudos bayom. Now you're required to eat 3 sudos during the day. Mikom makom im shochach loma ritzei b'suda hashniya. If a person forgot to say ritzei in the second suda, mitzadadim ha'achronim shelo yachzor v'yavarech. The achronim have mitzad over there that you don't go back and repeat benching. So that's really, it's different achronim. It's machlokes achronim, but the Mishnah Berurah takes on the two sides. Over here in Hilchos Yontif, he says if you miss, not Hilchos Yontif, in Hilchos Birchas HaMazon, L'gabe Yontif, if you miss the Suda Yontif night, and now you have 2 Sudas during the day, so those are both viewed as required Sudas that require you to go back. But on Shabbos, he takes on that if you miss the Suda Friday night, which now requires 3 Sudas during the day, the second Suda, which really normally would be the Shal Shudas, which wouldn't require you to go back, that will be a Mitzvah Shem tomorrow night shiur. But the Mishnah Berurah says over there, that if you miss the Suda Friday night, you're having 3 Sudas during the day, even the second Suda, you wouldn't have to go back. It's exactly the opposite of what we're saying over here. It's a Machlokes HaPoskim, but the Mishnah Berurah over here says one way, and the Mishnah Berurah over there brings the Sha'ar Tshuva the other way. Ubetam de'azu kasav a-machzik bracha. The machzik bracha explains what's the pshat by Hilchos Shabbos, that you wouldn't go back for the second Suda. She'ikir chiyav ha-su'udos b'Shabbos hu achas b'layla v'achas b'yom. The ikir chiyav of Suda on Shabbos is one at night and one during the day. Kederech habrios le'achol b'chol yom, like most normal people eat every day, one Suda at night, one Suda during the day. V'nimtshus ha-su'uda ha'shniya she'yochol b'yom dina k'suda shlishis. And therefore the second Suda that you eat during the day, which is beyond what most people normally do on a regular basis, that has a din of Shal Shudas, shekein bo acharei shekvar sod b'oso yom. That's already considered after you had your Sudas for the day, and therefore it's not considered a Suda that's required, even though it is required, and you wouldn't go back for Brachas HaMazon if you forgot Ritzei. Now the next part of the note brings a very interesting psak from Moshe Feinstein. Well, you could say the same thing by Yontif. The only thing is that they're explaining by Shabbos. So by Yontif, the Mishnah Berurah takes on by other poskim. But l'chara, they would say the same thing over here. L'chara, it's a machlokas. Let's say you have a person who is sick who needs to eat a Suda before davening. And in benching, he forgot to say Ritzei or Yalav Yavo. So Moshe Feinstein says, She'eno tzarech lachzor. In the Suda before davening, he doesn't have to go back. She'kevan she'ein zeh zman achila. Since this is not really a zman achila, you're not supposed to eat before davening. He just is allowed to eat because he's sick. So you don't go back. Ein achilaso nechsheves k'su'uda Shabbos linyan zeh. This achila is not considered a Suda Shabbos, and therefore you would not go back if you forgot Ritzei or Yalav Yavo. Od Kosav Shama, Moshe says further, and it follows from this, Ulefizeh, according to this, Im Amar HaChola Ritzei, if the Chola did say Ritzei in the first Suda before davening, Ubesuda Shala'achar Mikein, and in the next Suda after davening, Shochach La'omru, he forgot to say Ritzei, Mikom Makom Tzarech Lachzor Levarich. In that case, he would have to go back to bench. We would not view this second Suda of the day like a regular Shalosh Shudas. Normally by Shalosh Shudas, as we'll see, you don't go back if you forget Ritzei. Certainly not Yalav Yavo, you wouldn't go back if you forget Ritzei. But over here says Rav Moshe, since I'm telling you the first Suda before davening doesn't count as a real Suda, and you don't go back for Ritzei over there, so the second Suda which you're having after the Suda is really like your first Suda, and Mamela you would have to go back for Ritzei in the Suda after davening. Let's go weiter in the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah continues in Sefkat on Chav Zayin. That's going on the last point the Mechaber told us so far, and that was that Chol HaMoed has the same din as Rosh Chodesh. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Sefkat on Chav Zayin, V'Chol HaMoed dino ke Rosh Chodesh, Chol HaMoed is like Rosh Chodesh. Le'inyon she'ein tzarech lachzor. L'gabi this din that if you forgot to say Yalav Yavo and Chol HaMoed and you already said the Bracha of Atova Meitiv, you began too much, you don't go back. And so too, on Chol HaMoed would be like Rosh Chodesh, that if you realize your mistake before you start Atova Meitiv, Omer, you would say a special bracha, and that bracha is as follows. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, shenasan mo'adim li'amo Yisrael l'sason u'lesimcha, ve'eno chosem kemo b'Rosh Chodesh. And you wouldn't finish off with an ending bracha similar to Rosh Chodesh, not like Shabbos and Yontif. Now the Sha'ar Tzion over here in Os Yud Tes says, the Girsha that the Mishnah Berurah brings down is, Shenosan mo'adim le'amo Yisrael l'sason u'lesimcha. Says the Sha'ar Tzion, Kein Mashem Magin Giborim, that is the Mashros of Magin Giborim. U'kemo she'omrim b'tfilas Musaf, similar to a Lashon that we say in the davening of Musaf on Chol HaMoed. O she'yomar, or you could say, Yomim Kedoshim. Instead of mo'adim, you could say Yomim Kedoshim. U'kemo she'kosvu Sharei Achorim, like other Achorim say. Aval lo yomar yomim tovim. But if it's Chol HaMoed, you shouldn't put in that bracha yomim tovim, because Chol HaMoed is not viewed as a yontif. And if you look at note 22, he says we see a similar thing in the Mishnah Berurah later on. Ukein zeh kosav Mishnah Berurah lakamon she'ein lomar b'Chol HaMoed harachamon u'yanchilenu yom shekulo tov. At the Edom benching, we have a special harachamon that we say on yontif. But the Mishnah Berurah paskins later that you should not say this special harachamon of yontif on Chol HaMoed. Mishum she'eino yontif, it's not a yontif. Urei Beis Meir shetala zos b'deos aposkim u'inyan anachas tefillin b'chol hamoed. The Beis Meir says saying this harachim would depend if you wear tefillin chol hamoed or not. If you wear tefillin, so you're making a chol, and therefore you wouldn't say it. If you don't wear tefillin, it's more like a yontif, and then you would be able to say it. That's just an interesting point that connects to this shiur33671 over here. The next point that we'll see before we go weiter is one more bir halacha, and that is on the Ramah. There's no mishabura, there's just a bir halacha. Let's review what the Ramah told us. The Ramah said that it could be that even though you're not going to go back for Ya'alav Yavo on Rosh Chodesh, it could be you should say it later on in benching by the Harachamans, like we say by Al Nisim. And then the Ramah says, but Ula Yesh L'chalik. Maybe we should be L'chalik, because since in Ya'alav Yavo there are Haskara Shemos, we mentioned Hashem's name, Ein La'amr L'vatala. Then he says, Kei Nirali V'chei Nohagim. Says the Bir halacha, the last line on Tzadi Gimel. Ayin b'Magen Avram shetam al zeh. The Magen Avram is bewildered by this. D'chi aser lomar tachanunim sheyesh b'hem askara shemos. What, you're not allowed to say tachanunim that are the Shem Hashem? Look at the end of benching. We have tachanunim, we have tons of Shem of Hashem. So what do you mean? Rather, says Ramah, you shouldn't say it. You shouldn't say it as a Shem Hashem. We're allowed to say tachanunim with the Shem Hashem. Continues the bir halacha on the next page. V'dafka bracha levatala aser. The only thing you're not allowed to do with the Shem Hashem is the bracha levatala. Tachanunim, you're allowed to say the Shem Hashem. We do it all the time. V'ra'isi b'sefer b'gdei yesha shemiyashva. The b'gdei yesha answers and says, the b'kanga b'yalav v'yavo shekavanoso bazel losas yidei chiyav bracha. In this case, where you're saying yalav v'yavo by the tachanunim later, and you're coming to be yotze your chiyav bracha, gara, it's much worse. V'yesh b'zech shash bracha levatala. And in that case, it would be a bracha levatala. In other words, normally just saying tachanunim with the Shem Hashem is not a problem of saying motzi shem shema levatala, that's allowed. But over here where you're doing it, and your kavanah is to be yotze your chiyah bracha, so that makes it stronger, and it makes it more like a bracha, and that would be a chash of a bracha levatala. If you look at note number 27 over here, across from 186, he writes, now we see the Mishabura saying differently somewhere else. Here he's saying, again, that if you're saying Ya'alav Yavo, v'toras chiyav bracha, so it could be a chash of a bracha levatala. But omam l'gabe chola ha'ochel b'yom ha'kippurim, when it comes to a sick person who's eating on Yom Kippur, kosa b'sharatzion l'kamon, Sharatzion tells us later on, in Ochos Yom Kippur, sheritzei v'Ya'alav Yavo einon ela bakashos ba'alma. That ritzei and Ya'alav Yavo, they're only bakashos. Ve'ein ba'amirasom chash bracha levatala. Says the Chavetz Chaim over there, on Yom Kippur, if a chola is eating, you can say with saying Ya'alav Yavo, it's not a problem. It's only a bakasha ba'alma, therefore it's not a problem, bracha levatala. We just said over here, the Chavetz Chaim just told us over here, that you can't say it later on by the Rachamans, there are shemos, because since you're doing it as a chiyav bracha, that is considered a bracha levatala. Here he says explicitly, it's not a bracha levatala. It's only a bakasha ba'alma. But we said before, a bakasha ba'alma is a bracha levatala. So it seems to be a stira in the Chavetz Chaim. Answers Hagon Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Shekevan shesham hasafik hu shema chayav achola lomer Ya'alav Yavo. Since over there by Yom Kippur, the suffix is that really maybe be'etzem is chayav to say Ya'alav Yavo in the proper place. L'chein echriya la'omra b'mekomo derech bakasha. Therefore the achra of the Chavetz Chaim is that you should in fact say it in the proper place, but derech bakasha, because maybe you're chayav, maybe not chayav, still misafik, you should say it in the proper place. Masha'en kein Benidon didon, which is not the case over here in the Bir halacha, sheshachach la'omro b'mekomo. Over here you forgot to say it in its place. V'yesh lodon im la'omro shelo b'mekomo. And here we're clear whether you should say it not in the place. In other words, we know you're yotze if you forget Ya'alav Yavo altogether. You're yotze, so there's no absolute chiyuv of Ya'alav Yavo over here. And it's a suffix, should you put it in the place where it's not the proper place or not? So there the Chavetz Chaim says to put it in b'toras bracha over there, even as a bakasha, that could be a problem of bracha levatala. But in the case of a chola on Yom Kippur, it's a suffix, should he say it, should he not say it? So the eitzah is to say it in the proper place as a bakasha, that would not be a problem of a suffix of a bracha levatala. Let's go weiter in the Mechaber. Go back to page Tzadi Gimel, the last line. The imchal Rosh Chodesh b'Shabbos. If Rosh Chodesh was on Shabbos, till now we discuss Shabbos alone, Rosh Chodesh alone, now we discuss Rosh Chodesh on Shabbos. The Hizkir shel Shabbos, v'lo Hizkir shel Rosh Chodesh. You said Ritzei, and you forgot Ya'alav Yavo. V'lo Nizkar ad shehizkar hatov ha'metiv. You didn't realize your mistake until you began hatov ha'metiv. Eino choser, you don't go back, because L'maisa, you said Ritzei for Shabbos, which is Ma'akiv. You didn't say Ya'alav Yavo for Rosh Chodesh, which is not Ma'akiv, and therefore you just go weiter. Continues the Mechaber, let's see what Mishabura on that. The top of 186, so in that case, Eino Choser. Kemo b'chol Rosh Chodesh k'sheshachach. Like any other Rosh Chodesh, if you forget Ya'alav Yavo, we just learned you don't go back. The fact that it's Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, as long as you said Ritzei, And you forgot Yelav Yavo, it's fine. It's just like a regular Rosh Chodesh. You forgot Yelav, you don't go back. The Afa Gavdibahu Yomalo Sagi Delo Achil Pas says the Mishabur, the Chiddush here is, even though on this day of Rosh Chodesh, which also is Shabbos, is an absolute chiyuv to eat bread, Hahi Mishum Shabbasi, that chiyuv to eat bread on that day is only a chiyuv midin Shabbos. V'lav Mishum Rosh Chodesh has nothing to do with Rosh Chodesh. The Achilas Pas Rosh Chodesh Leka Chiyuva, there is no chiyuv to eat bread on Rosh Chodesh. V'shel Shabbos are his chiyuv. So we don't factor in the fact that there's a chiyuv to eat bread on that day, therefore you're required to go back for everything. Whatever caused the chiyuv, that's what you have to go back for. The chiyuv was din Shabbos, you have to go back for Ritzei. It happens to be Rosh Chodesh, you forgot Yelav Yavo, the chiyuv achilas bread on that day is not because of Rosh Chodesh, and therefore you would not have to go back for Rosh Chodesh. Says the Mechaber, right to the top line on 186. V'im shochach shel Shabbos v'niskar kodem shehisla tova v'shochach gam shel Shabbos. So now in this case, not only do you forget Yelav Yavo for Rosh Chodesh, you also forgot Ritzei for Shabbos. V'niskar kodem shehisla tova meitiv, and you realize your mistake before you began the bracha of Tova meitiv. Kolo Rosh Chodesh im Shabbos v'omer. You include Rosh Chodesh in the bracha of Shabbos, and you say as follows: Shenosan Shabbosos umnucha v'roshei chadoshim lezikaron. The impasach ba'atova meitiv. But if you already started the next bracha of Tova meitiv, then since you left off Ritzei and Yelav Yavo, chozer l'rosh birchas hamazon. You go back to the beginning of benching. Umazkir shel Shabbos v'shel Rosh Chodesh. Even though you're only going back for Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh is not ma'akeh, but l'maisa, since you're benching again, the first benching wasn't good, you go back and you say, the second time around, you say Ritzei, and you say Yelav Yavo. Let's finish up the Mechaber. V'yesh Misha Omer, there are those who say, Shem Shochach Shel Shabbos v'Rosh Chodesh, if you in fact forgot Ritzei and Yelav Yavo, v'nizkar kodem she'isla Tova meitiv, and you realize your mistake before Tova meitiv, Omer Shenosan Shabbosos umnucha v'roshei chadoshim lezikaron. You say the regular bracha that we just mentioned, incorporating Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, v'chosem b'shel Shabbos v'eino chosem b'shel Rosh Chodesh. But in the Chasima, you'll only say Shabbos and you won't say Rosh Chodesh, since normally you never say a Chasima on Rosh Chodesh, and now the whole bracha is only coming within Shabbos, not coming within Rosh Chodesh, so you would only end up in the Chasima for Shabbos, and you would leave off for Rosh Chodesh. Let's stop over here, because the rest is going to get a little more in detail, and we'll continue Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow night.
You have been listening to a shiur from shasilluminated.org. For other shiurim on many topics, or to hear an Iyun shiur on any daf in Shas, including Mara Mekaymas on each shiur, please visit www.shasilluminated.org. To order CDs or for more information, please call 203-312-SHAS. That's 203-312-7427, or email info@shasilluminated.org.